Tensions rising with Russia as it conducts joint military drills with China and Iran one day after a Russian fighter jet collided with a U.S. drone over the Black Sea. Senior fellow at Defense Priorities and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis joining us right now. Welcome, Colonel. Great to see you.
Good to be here.
And this is not the first time this has happened from the Russian military. How should the U.S. be responding to this and to these joint military drills among our adversaries?
You know, we just got to keep this in context. This is a very small military operation or exercise in the Gulf. It's in international waters. This is the third or fourth of these really since 2017 that's been going on, especially between China and Iran. And Russia's been added in the last 3 years, but it's very small. China, in fact, has a single Top 52 destroyer in its fleet that's participating in this. And this is happening concurrent with American naval operations also in the Gulf, which includes 50 nations and thousands of our fighters and jets, et cetera. So in context, this is a pretty small thing. And it's just really for show and nothing that we really need to be worried about.
And Colonel, there's been a lot of attention to the battle for Bakhmut. That's a region in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. The headline in Forbes that I saw this morning was "The Russians haven't won and the Ukrainians haven't lost." Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the outcome is really more of a symbolic value than it is strategic or operational. But what is the significance of the battle in this region?
You know, I keep hearing the Western officials, like Austin, you just mentioned there, just kind of trying to downplay this, like it's like, hey, well, once this falls, it's not going to be a big deal. Stoltenberg last week said the same kind of thing, basically that it could fall within days. And the problem is that Ukraine continues to throw more and more resources into this and more reserves into this to try and cling to hold on, because they only have part of the city now, but they are paying an extraordinary cost to be able to hold on to it. And some people claim that, yes, but they're also imposing a serious cost on Russia. But look, you can't get into an attrition battle with Russia because Russia has tens of millions more potential fighters to throw into this battle than Ukraine does, and they can't win that kind of war. And that's also going to cause potential problems for a spring counteroffensive that Ukraine wants to launch, because they're using forces that have otherwise been earmarked for that, making the future attack even less likely to succeed.
Right, and you also wrote an article on this and believe that the victor in this battle could be setting the stage for ultimately who wins the war. Explain that.
Yeah, and I wrote that in the publication 1945, which basically suggests that, look, like the Stalingrad battle in 1943, when the Soviet forces defeated Germany's attempt to take that city, which was of some strategic value, but not that much. But both sides placed such important emotional to it importance that they expended millions of men to try to hold it. Well, Germany eventually lost that, and the Soviet Union started pushing them back. It took still almost 2 more years of war, but the losses that the German side held in losing that battle cost it so that it could never recover. If something similar to that happens now, to where Ukraine spends so many soldiers to try to hold on to that territory, as opposed to doing the military expedient of falling back to their next prepared defensive, from which they could extract even more cost on Russia, they may end up having so much fewer troops that they don't have the ability to continue the war beyond this. And Russia can continue pouring more soldiers into it. And this could set the stage for them to ultimately lose the war.
And Colonel, you've said several times there is very little path to victory for Ukraine. So given what you just said, and if that is the case, what's the end game here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. That's the most important question we should be asking, because I argue that there is no path to military victory for Ukraine. Not that it's unlikely, but that there's physically no chance for Ukraine to militarily drive Russia off the field. And the most guaranteed part of that is the Russian nuclear arsenal. There is no chance that they're going to allow their forces to conventionally be driven off of the Ukraine, and especially out of Crimea, and not use their tactical nuclear weapons. That being the case, we have to ask ourselves, then what is our end game? Because right now we're not providing enough information or weapons for Ukraine to even have a valid chance to push them back if they had the personnel. And so at some point we have to say, the best thing we can do to help Ukraine and to prevent more deaths and destruction of cities is to put more pressure on both sides to find some kind of mutually acceptable negotiated settlement to stop the killing and stop the destruction.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks,
We appreciate
Jan.
it.